Welcome to the CISOWise podcast. Join Dr. Earl Crane, founder of CISOWise, as he interviews CISOs and cybersecurity experts on their wisdom gained from years of experience on what works and what doesn't in building a cybersecurity program. This week we're joined by Brent Maher, CTO of Johnson Financial Group. Listen to CISOWise on the go by subscribing to the CISOWise podcast, available on all podcast apps.
90+% of cybersecurity incidents use social manipulation in large by email. So having a really strong email simulated phishing program is important.
This episode is brought to you by the Carnegie Mellon University CISO Certificate Program, which is named a National Center of Academic Excellence in Information Assurance Education by the NSA and the Department of Homeland Security. In the CISO program, you will learn the skills you need to be an effective CISO through targeted, interdisciplinary coursework and hands-on practical applications led by faculty from Carnegie Mellon University's Hines College and the Software Engineering Institute, including yours truly. I invite you to learn more by visiting hines.cmu.edu/CISO or follow the link in the show notes below. This is Earl Crane with the CISOWise podcast. Thanks for joining. This is from an interview I did with Brent Maher when he was the CISO at Johnson Financial Group a couple of years ago. He's since moved on to be the Chief Technology Officer at Johnson Financial Group, but the insights he shares are just as relevant as ever. During this interview, we talk about the importance of the human side of information security and some insights he's had from phishing campaigns he ran while he was the CISO. Let's get to the program. Brent, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Earl. Good to be here.
And I wanted to ask you, based on your experience as a cybersecurity leader, and you've been in the field for a long time, what have you discovered works well to drive your security initiatives?
I definitely think having a engage with the business mindset is paramount. Aligning up with strategy, business strategies, aligning your cybersecurity strategy is important. Depending on where your function sits, aligning well with key stakeholders like IT, audit, and risk are obviously really important to us in financial services. A couple more tactical items. I think some phishing, email phishing capability. 90+% of cybersecurity incidents used in some way, shape, or form are instantiated by using some kind of social manipulation in large by email services. So having a really strong email simulated phishing program is important. And then also really just taking care of kind of some blocking and tackling. So vulnerability management is another kind of ABC 1, 2, 3 type services that we really have focused on and strengthened in years past.
You mentioned that 90% of incidents come through a phishing attack vector. Can you share some of your successes that you've had around phishing and mitigating that threat?
Yeah, so we've really focused on several layers, people, process, and technology. We really haven't shied away from that strategy. So need some standard controls. So email filtering technologies are in place. And so once you get the technology in place, obviously operations needs to be able to handle live incidents as they come in through the email vector. I guess what I'd spend a little bit more time talking about is securing the human element. So we have in many organizations, several individuals that are using email on a daily basis and preparing them for email phishing schemes that will come through, make their way through the filtration systems, because that's just the reality is they're not going to catch everything. Especially highly targeted attacks that don't come through in large volumes have an easier way of coming through down to the associates. So our program really is centered around preparing those associates for an adversarial email.
Can you talk a little bit more about what you found really works when you're operationalizing your phishing program, dealing with the human element?
I think one of the key transitions that I've seen be successful is really differentiating between providing awareness to your user base or actually educating them and preparing them to take action. So one of the things I've seen in many programs struggle is, and when I speak to awareness is, hey, if we do simulated phishing, so you actually inject emails into your environment and you measure the susceptibility your users have against those threats. So when I say awareness, if you only do that 3 or 4 times a year, your user base really isn't going to pick up on your annual training, see 3 or 4 simulated templates a year, and really build a muscle memory off of how to identify malicious emails. So it's like trying to learn how to hit a baseball, and you're only going to throw 4 balls at the kid and hope that he learns how to swing. So what we really did, and I've seen successful, is definitely upping the volume of how much reps they're going to see a simulated phishing email. So in our organization and many in our vertical are simulating these every single month so that the employees receive enough volume to build muscle memory. And then the other part is really focusing on adult learning theory. So how do adults learn? And many of us have children and they can sit through school in 8 hours, and professional workers aren't geared to sit through an hour-long class. That is really not in alignment with what they're used to. So really shrinking those learning opportunities down into micro lessons, and they're highly targeted.
How is that micro lesson implemented?
We have a specific email template. Let's say it's your package has arrived from a very popular online distribution provider. Okay. Well, what we'll do is we'll build custom training every single month and shrink it down to 2 minutes or less. And we will point out to the end user the exact things they should have spotted on the exact email they just clicked on. And when they click on the email, it auto launches the training right on the spot. I get a 2-minute dose of the exact thing that I just clicked on, and it creates a high level of correlation between what we're trying to teach them to what they've just experienced. And we've seen some significant progress in reducing our overall susceptibility to email phishing schemes.
I recall when we first started doing phishing awareness training, and the conversation was that we would start sending employees fake phishing emails. The CISO I was working with at the time back at a government agency had a concern that we would be sending and tricking employees. How was your phishing program received by board members, and did they have any comment?
One of the tactics I took is to get buy-in at the top early. And in order to do that, really a strong business case needs to be developed. So early on in this podcast, I mentioned 92% of cybersecurity incidents originate in some way, shape, or form through social manipulation, mostly through email. So I think that's an important metric when you're talking to executives about the threat landscape. Another technique that I've used in several of my selling experiences, and especially through the phishing program, is also making a connection between peer benchmarking. So in my case, financial services, but whatever vertical you're in, go out and figure out what the benchmark is for your particular institution. So I did that and figured out where we were as an organization relative to peer, and helping illustrate that there was a gap. Also identifying kind of real life stories. So what are some of the marquee breaches that occurred related to a email intrusion? So providing a level of reality to the situation. So we're not focused on unrealized threats. There's been threats that have been realized in other institutions. Here's the risk vector, and here's where we are relative to peers. Really brings together a nice set of selling points to the executive group. Some of the other things that I learned along the way, so sell at the top. So we have various committees that allows me to do that. And then also creating visibility at the board level. So it's an important thing to our organization, and developing a handful of metrics relative to how well your users are doing relative to the phishing program, so that the board has visibility, and the board is expecting management to drive this as an important element through the organization.
What were some of the challenges you ran into when you were starting your phishing awareness program? How did you overcome those? And did you have any lessons learned?
One of the things that we learned along the way is you have a user population that is going to move in a direction at their own pace. And I think one of the challenges that we experienced was providing various email templates of very different degrees of complexity. And one of the things that we learned through that process is we actually now have a classification scheme. Think of complexity level 1 through 4, and 4 is sort of the extremely hard to detect, really very little tells other than just this is something that an individual wouldn't typically ask me for. And level 1 is like the easy stuff, misspelled, weird domain. on and on. So one of the things I think is we learned along the way is creating a complexity scheme and then staying true and consistent. We're not going to move to level 2 until we feel like we have the right user behaviors occurring at level 1. And I would say another one is really when you do get to higher levels of complexity in these phishing simulation programs, you do start to push the edge, and you do need to prepare yourself for users being frustrated, because essentially you are trying to trick them into clicking on a template. And so not everybody looks at that like, hey, great, thanks for educating me. I feel much better now that I know. Some people feel that is very adversarial activity within your own company.
So how do you deal with that response?
So I think bracing yourself for that outcome, and then prepping for a response to that. So what I was less smooth at early on and am much better at now is really providing a response to those challenge discussions with business partners. Early on, I think it was just, hey, this is what the threat actors are up to. And I think really painting a much cleaner narrative to value proposition. This is what the adversarials are up to. Here's the metrics in terms of how many companies are falling victim to this. And also, I've gotten asked from board members, so how far do you push this? When are we done? And I think having an answer for that too is important. So we create the adversarial environment up to the level that the threat actors are willing to take. So when we see threat actors cooling off in this space, that's when we peel back. But again, the whole point is to prevent a breach. And if our adversaries are getting very tricky and very manipulative, we need to prepare our associates for that same level of adversarial activity.
Brent, I really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and wisdom here on CISOWise.
You bet.
You have been listening to the CISOWise podcast. Join us next week when we talk to Brandon Hines, Vice President of Security at Dimensional Fund Advisors, about hiring and third-party assessments. Learn more about how you can get the wisdom and insights of a world-class CISO as your cybersecurity mentor at www.CISOWise.com.